Good morning, everyone. This is Rebecca Smith-Aldridge, the Coordinator for Library Sustainability at the Mid-Hudson Library System. Thank you for joining us this morning for an introduction to how to think more sustainably about your library's facility. This morning, our plan is to make sure we're all talking about sustainability using the same language, using a common definition that everyone can wrap their minds around, so the rest of this all makes sense. We're going to take a look at existing buildings. Since we all know you have an existing building, what are some of the basic things you can be doing to ensure sustainable operations and maintenance, as well as where you can go to take a deeper dive into greener sustainability, operational and maintenance issues. Then, if you're lucky enough to be approaching a major renovation or new construction program, we're going to be taking a look at what resources are out there to help guide you in those major opportunities that you have to affect the future of not only your library, but your community for the long haul. And then we'll wrap it up by talking about where money comes from to do this type of work and where you might be planning ahead to make good things happen for both your library and your community. So getting started here, one of the things we want to point out is why sustainability is such a critical issue these days. It's one of the hottest topics around when it comes to library facilities, and we're going to talk a little bit about why that is and where you can find more information about this. But this book has really struck a chord with a lot of us here in the library community. It's a book by Simon Sinek called Start With Why. He's a business consultant that looks for patterns and how successful businesses stay on top. And one of the things he's noticed is that libraries, or rather businesses that speak and do their business from a place of why they do what they do, are far more successful than those that just talk about what they do. So when we think about the why behind what we do, at the heart of what we do is really working hard to create a vibrant, healthy, caring community. And our library should be a reflection of those values that we hold true. When we think about ourselves as educators, we're there to educate those who walk through our door, but also to serve as a community leader, to make sure that people see us as a trusted public institution that makes good decisions on behalf of the community with the dollars they have invested in our organizations. And there's a very big opportunity for us to make that statement of how trustworthy and smart we are with the public's dollars and trust by thinking sustainably about one of our biggest assets, which are our facilities. So this concept of start with why is a big driver behind why sustainability, and particularly sustainable design for buildings, has become such a hot topic throughout the profession. So looking for a common definition here of sustainability, the New York Library Association Sustainability Initiative has adopted the triple bottom line definition that makes it clear that there's a balancing act here that needs to be thought through, that it's not just about going blindly into environmentally sound design in buildings and operations, but that has to be balanced with our budgets and how socially equitable what the choices that we're making are, both for those people that use our buildings and those that are affected by decisions that we make, either in the local community or in the global community. So a good example of this might be when let's say you had the opportunity to build a new building. And about 10 years ago, I was talking to a library board who needed to build a new library building. And when we started to talk about using the LEED program, which we're going to talk more about later today, they kept telling me, oh, it costs too much to do that. And at the time, they were right. It was really expensive to do that. And we're going to talk about how that has changed over time. But let's just take that hypothetical situation. If you wanted to prioritize having a green or sustainably designed building, but the technologies to make it happen were out of reach financially, that wouldn't be a sustainable decision. On the other side, if it's environmentally sound, but the resources or technology that you need to make it happen are produced in a community where it compromises the health and well-being of that community, maybe by creating toxic chemicals through the production of a piece of technology you need, that also isn't very sustainable. So when we're looking at creating a balanced path towards sustainability, all three of these things have to be taken into consideration. Sometimes this is called the three-legged stool, because if one of these things is out of balance, the stool will tip over. It's interesting how this definition of sustainability works for not only a product or a building or the ecosystem, but also for your library. When you think about how well your library can respond to your community's needs, all three of these areas need to be taken in consideration and treated almost like a lens through which you make decisions decisions about library operations and outreach. To be a truly sustainable library, you need to be contributing to a sustainable community. The truth is, without our communities being vibrant and healthy, it's very hard for them to help invest in a library that's going to be sustainable. So a great tagline to keep in mind throughout this is the idea of putting the community, whether it be local or global, at the heart of decisions we make about our facilities, both for those people who use our facilities and those who are affected in the immediate area by our facilities, as well as those people who live in other areas of our world that are affected by the decisions we make, either by the amount of energy we're using or the CO2 emissions that we create through the decisions that we make. All of those decisions add up to tell the story about what a caring, trusted institution that our libraries are. So the intersection of this idea of creating sustainable libraries and sustainable communities has been coined as sustainable thinking by the New York Library Association's Sustainability Initiative. And if you haven't noticed yet, we're going to say the word sustainability like a record number of times this morning. So the whole idea of sustainable thinking is that a library is taking those core values it has, whether it be, the social responsibility to care for each other, or just the general idea of working towards the public good, and making sure we're aligning those values with the resources that we have. In this case, this morning, that resource that we're talking about is your building. That's a major asset that you basically deploy on behalf of your community to carry out your mission. And do those two things, your value of social responsibility and the public good and all types of literacy and democracy, do those things align with the decisions you make about those resources? To make sure you're contributing to a community that is sustainable and resilient and is thriving through the decisions that you make, both from your program and service delivery and from operational decisions that may seem like more behind the scenes types of decisions, but definitely add up to help tell the story about what kind of library you are. So this definition, which I feel like I've got tattooed on my arm right now, but this is where I think our decision making needs to land, that we think sustainably all the time to align those values and resources with the local and global community's right to endure, bounce back from disruption, and thrive by bringing new and energetic life to fruition through choices that we're making in all areas of library operations and outreach. As you guys know, it's really hard to get the word out about who the library is and why we're important in the community. And it's not just the verbal and written messages we send out. It's also those institutional choices we make that are a reflection of who we are and what type of neighbor we are in our local and global community. And again, the building is a great opportunity to show how smart we are with the public's trust and the public's money. So at their core, buildings are for people. And sometimes we forget this when we're looking at the bottom line of things and we just want to make sure we can afford what we're doing and get it done. But the truth is, the truly sustainable building has to benefit the people that come and work there in that building every day, and your patrons who come in to learn in your space and socialize in your space. Libraries are learning environments, and the atmosphere you create through the building, it can be either conducive to the education environment, or it could detract from education environment if it's an uncomfortable space, or a space that's not well lit, or smells kind of funny, or is uncomfortable from a temperature perspective. Those things contribute to the learning environment that you're creating in terms of the ambiance and atmosphere, but also in terms of the money it takes to operate that space and how that might take away from or add to the money you have to carry out the programs and services that your community relies so much on. So keeping that in mind, that buildings are for people, can really drive some of the decision making and make some of your choices clearer in the long run. So just a quick snapshot here of how impactful buildings are in the United States. When you think about a lot of the conversations about sustainability when it comes to energy usage and health of buildings and the resources that get used to maintain these spaces that we spend an awful lot of our time in, buildings are consuming almost 40% of all energy used. So there are major opportunities when you're thinking about your building to have a big impact in a lot of these areas, particularly how much energy energy and electrical energy are used. Also, the natural resources of our world. How many of those are used to build new buildings that maybe didn't need to be built? If we could reuse some of the existing building stock, that actually might be the most sustainable choice we can make. So for those of you who are maintaining historic buildings or looking to renovate and expand an existing building, those are very sustainable choices. So don't think that only new construction buildings could be fully sustainably designed. There's a lot of opportunity for buildings that already are in existence. And in fact, that might be even the more sustainable choice, to use what you've already got instead of building fresh. So an interesting trend that was noticed a couple of years ago, Library Journal, which is a leading professional journal in our field, they have a program called New Landmark Libraries, where they're looking at buildings that are being built across the country and identifying those are the characteristics that really set the tone for the future of library facilities. And in order to be named a new landmark library, you must address sustainability. So this is becoming institutionalized in the thinking around the future of library design, that all new library buildings will be sustainably built in the future. So taking a look here, when they're judging those buildings, they're looking at how well they selected the site. Does it disturb the ecosystem? Is it working well with the property that they're situated on? How well do they use water? Are they conserving water in their design? Are there thoughtfully made choices about bathroom fixtures and landscaping? How much energy are they using? Have they minimized the need to produce or to bring in energy for their building? What are the materials and resources used? Are those materials and resources a reflection of the geography of the building? How far did resources have to travel to get to them, to build those facilities? Did they have a keen eye towards the indoor environmental quality, meaning the air quality, the thermal comfort, how hot or cool it is in the building? Is it a comfortable learning environment to be in? And how well do they talk about those good choices they made to educate the public about how smart their building is and how well it serves the taxpayers that come through their doors to access library services? So this particular item here has become the standard by which new library buildings are judged. So while most buildings you'll see listed on the Library Journal website as new landmark libraries are actually certified under one of the programs that we're going to talk about today, not all of them are. So we also want to be clear, you don't necessarily have to reach certification levels to be a sustainable building, but you do have to be able to demonstrate thoughtful decisions that have been made about your building and also demonstrate the actual outcomes of those decisions that you're making. So again, those are all things we'll talk about today. So for those of you in situations, maybe you're a library director or you're a trustee or a staff person, a big part of making sure your library and your library building is sustainable for the future is really about almost a sales pitch of how you talk about making sustainable decisions in your organization. And there's three very clear areas that I think I would encourage you to get really good at talking about, so that when you really get to that level of understanding where you're confident these are the right kinds of choices for your library, you can help bring others along with you to the level of understanding that you have. Number one, bottom line, is what most people want to cut to the chase on. So get really good at talking about the huge return on investment that sustainable design can have for you. I've got a couple of examples for you this morning that you can use to point to about how it's not just about the right thing to do for the environment, which it totally is. Sometimes that's not enough for people, unfortunately. They need to be convinced from an economic standpoint. So being able to demonstrate how you can keep down your operating costs, how you can create a healthier environment, which leads to less sick days for staff, which have been proven in research over and over again. These are important things that as a governing body, a board would want to be able to feel confident about as they move forward in big decisions related to their facility. That other issue, which we just hinted to, is the health and well-being of the people who come into our buildings, both to work there and use them. And thoughtful design and maintenance of our buildings contributes to the health of the people that are inside of our buildings. That's also part of being a sustainable facility. And the personal impact that I think libraries need to embrace, the idea of being leaders in our community on the topic of sustainability, both, as we've said already this morning, to demonstrate the good decisions we make on behalf of taxpayers, a visible representation of the care and concern we take in running our business, and also doing what's right when other people maybe haven't figured out some of that stuff already. We are educational institutions, and we can educate through our choices and our facilities just as we can through the materials on our shelves and in our databases. So really embracing our role as education leaders and sustainability leaders in our community can lead to very good things for libraries, both in terms of the respect we garner and the future investment people will make in our buildings. So some of the first easy steps we wanted to put in front of you today, I've got 3 examples here of libraries who have really institutionalized the idea of sustainability in their organizations, which is a really smart place to start, because when you start making nitty-gritty decisions about green cleaning or what kind of heating system you want to have in your renovation project, when you can point back to a shared value set on your board and in your organization, that helps other things go smoother down the line so you can have a bigger impact as a library. This is an example of a library that's embedded sustainability as a core value into their long-range plan. In each of their last 2 long-range plans, so meaning for the past decade, they've identified sustainability, meaning managing their resources responsibly to maintain financial, social, and environmental sustainability for the well-being of their community. That's embedded in the culture of that library. And the more you learn about the West Vancouver Library, you'll see they make decision after decision that reflect their values. And that pays off for them again and again in the stories you read about this library. It's very interesting how a lot of the good choices they make and the good press they get are tied back to this adoption of sustainability as a core value. Another top-level example here is from one of our own libraries, the Kingston Library. Back in 2010, their board adopted what's called the Climate Smart Community Library Pledge. The Climate Smart Community Program is actually a New York State program that a lot of municipalities have adopted. And the city of Kingston adopted their own Climate Smart Pledge. And the library was smart enough to see that was a big community priority, and they could build on that as well. So they thought through their options as a library, as a leader in their community, and how they could take a stand on these issues to demonstrate they were making good decisions on behalf of the community as well. If you ever speak to Margie, the director at Kingston, she can tell you the story of how this led to a fabulous partnership with the city of Kingston, who helped to fund their redone parking lot because it addressed a priority of the city to manage stormwater runoff in the city. And it brought money into the institution because their priorities were aligned with the larger community's priorities. But setting a resolution like this at the board level, again, gives license and the green light for other choices to be made in your organization on a daily basis that speak to these goals of being more sustainable, more green, more energy efficient. And it also helps drive, I think, future decision making when you have big opportunities like a building renovation or expansion plan. The third example I have is another one of our libraries, the Desmond Fish Library down in Putnam County. For the past 10 years, they've had a sustainability committee of their board who was very focused and tasked with figuring out how to lower the expense of the library for energy usage and exploring renewable energy sources and how to pay for those. So when you visit that library, you'll see they've made some really smart investments in their heating and cooling system. Solar panel picks they've made for their property. They're constantly taking a look not only at the bottom line of the budget, but the bottom line of their energy efficiency in that building. And the board prioritized it to such a degree, they have a committee of the board who's been working for close to a decade to make that a reality. Very smart decisions that have inspired donations to this library. This is a library who's primarily funded through donations. They do have public funding as well, but they have to constantly make the case to not only voters, but donors to invest in their organization. And this has been a big selling point for them in those efforts. So again, integrating into your long-range plan, board resolution that acknowledges a commitment to this type of activity, and maybe even committing a board committee or a green team of staff and board members to help oversee and make these good decisions might be something to institutionalize to help these decisions and these investments get made in a way that everyone understands why you're doing it, and to get the most bang for your buck out of things in terms of research and development, and also to amplify telling the story of what good choices that you're making in the community. So let's get into talking about existing buildings. And just a reminder, if you have questions along the way, you can put them in the chat box. If I don't get to them during the webinar, Kirsten's going to be collecting them to make sure I answer them at the end today. So existing buildings, you're all in a current library facility, and I bet there's some things that you could be doing that might contribute to a more sustainable operation and maintenance of that facility. So when you think through operation and maintenance issues, there's a host of things that fall into that bucket, from cleaning your building to recycling in your building to watering the lawn, whatever you do for landscaping, a whole ton of things you could be doing. But this is really an introductory webinar, so I'm going to focus on three, I think, entry-level things that you might want to consider, and then point out where you could go to take a deeper dive on some of this stuff to be more comprehensive, which I know a lot of you are poised and ready to do. So let's start off with, I think, one of the simplest spots to begin this that has a big impact, which is green cleaning. Lots of libraries just kind of mindlessly buy cleaning products and go at it, often creating an uncomfortable air quality in their library. Sometimes we haven't visited how we clean our library in a while. Some of us are dealing with older buildings that have air quality issues. Thinking about how you clean your carpet, track off mats. Interesting to note, when people walk through your door, there's supposed to be at least 6 feet of track off mats to get all the crud off the bottom of their shoes so it doesn't get tracked in on your carpet, which degrades the life of your carpet as well as sometimes contributes to air quality in your building. So here are 6 specific things that you might want to think through. The picture on the left from the Fayetteville Public Library, they are one of the leaders in the country. Back in 2010, their director at the time, Louise Schaefer, wrote this awesome article called Let Green Creep. They'd built the first LEED certified building in Arkansas, but she realized they weren't operating their building with that same ecological ethic they had brought to building their building. So this is a huge library, no joke, like 90,000 square feet. And the choices that they're making have resulted in a maintenance closet, which is what you're seeing the picture of there, that they spend for a 90,000 square foot building less than $100 a year to clean the building in terms of what they spend on cleaning solutions, which is super interesting when you think about it. We buy a lot of sometimes specialized cleaning solutions that really we could bring down to a very basic solution that we could mix ourselves or are created by companies that are focused on helping with green cleaning. I'm going to show you a spot where the work has been done for you to pick out that kind of stuff for your library. The logo you see there, Green Seal, that's the third-party certification system that's recognized as the third-party certification of green cleaning products. So if you are buying stuff on your own, that's something to keep your eye out for. That means it's been vetted. It has lower what's called VOCs, or volatile organic compounds, which contribute to unhappy air quality in many spaces. Many of you are already using low VOC paints when you upgrade your buildings. They also make that kind of product for cleaning solutions. Also, the other interesting thing is we often use chemicals that are really harsh that wear down the surfaces of our buildings. And so going to a less harsh chemical can also extend the life of some of our products, our surfaces, and our fixtures in our buildings. So 6 choices there for you, for places to start. And just a reminder, you'll get all of these slides after the presentation, so which I should have said before I showed you the slides so you didn't frantically write down everything, I guess, but now you know. So a green cleaning policy is important to make sure that gets institutionalized, and regardless of turnover in your organization, from custodial staff or in small libraries when it's just the regular staff doing cleaning, or a director leaves and you have a new director, or that one trustee who really prioritizes this stuff isn't around anymore. So getting a policy in writing that demonstrates a commitment to green cleaning is a great way to get started, and also to authorize the purchase of materials that might be different from what you've purchased in the past. We've got a couple of samples of these. If you're interested, just let me know. I'm happy to send them to you. So the New York State Office of General Services, OGS, which some of you may be familiar with, hopefully, they do great work on behalf of New York State institutions like public libraries, because they're tasked with actually researching and bidding out products, so that for libraries that have to go through a bidding process to buy things like cleaning products or technology, they don't have to go through the bid process. OGS does it for you, and then you can buy directly from them through the vendors they've approved to get those items. They actually have a whole green cleaning program. Not only can you use this website to order products that you know have been vetted already by New York State, you can also access educational resources. If you're a larger library that has custodial staff, you'll definitely want to check this out and integrate some of their resources into your orientation and training for maintenance staff. Really extensive resources you can use to craft your own training, and sometimes they also offer training, which might be interesting to have your staff attend. Because it's been very interesting to learn that a lot of these choices that we need to make are very much based on the training of our staff and our buildings. If they understand why we're doing something and how to do it, they're happy to do it for us. But if we just task them with go figure it out yourself and they don't understand why they're being asked to do that, sometimes there's resistance, especially if they've been doing things the same way for a long time. So this is a fantastic program through New York State that really gives us everything we need to make good decisions and institutionalize them in our organizations. Recycling, a shocking number of libraries don't recycle. And you guys know I'm kind of a sustainability wonk, so I'm definitely keeping my eye out for that when I visit libraries. And it is always a little disappointing when I go to dispose of something and I can't find a receptacle to take a bottle or recycle paper in the library. So making sure that's very visible in your library is a great way to demonstrate leadership right in the building, that you understand what you're doing and how you do it. Sometimes there's some work you have to do on the back end of that with your carting company to make sure you understand your options of how you get rid of things. But I think promoting recycling is really important, and also promotion of the reduction of the waste produced in your library. So a really good example of that are libraries that use print control programs that encourage people not to print if they don't have to. The Mayapack Library has a scanning station instead of a copy station that's near the reference collection. So again, encouraging people to keep information in an e-format if that's comfortable for their learning style, and facilitating that through the choices made in your building really, I think, help govern people and push them towards making better decisions that creates less waste, but also provides a receptacle for them to know what to do with the waste that does get created while they're in the library. Many libraries don't allow you to drink in the library, but those that do, this is, I think, an important thing to cut down not only on litter outside your building, but also to train people to recycle and do it the right way in the building. So landscaping is the second area that I thought we would tackle, since most of us have library buildings that are on property that involve landscaping. Landscaping is something that might not have been given much thought, as I've discovered over the years, and it usually doesn't become an issue until there's some type of an extreme in terms of water, whether that be excessive rain or a lack of rain, meaning a drought situation. You'll see in your property sometimes there's flooding, or you'll see that your plants are all dying because they're not drought resistant. So a couple of tips here about your landscaping is to reduce, really we're talking about water issues here. So can you reduce the amount of water you need to water plants by picking plants that are native to our region of the country, making sure those are researched and planted. And the Red Hook Library did that, their friends group did that when they redid the landscaping in front of their library. They picked things, they actually did, it was a fun research project for them, working with their historical society to figure out which plants were native to their region of the state and use those to plant in front of the library, which also became a nice talking point and learning experience for people who visit the grounds of the library. Using porous pavers, if you ever visit the Mayapack Library, you'll notice a strip of their parking lot looks like the lot you see under the wheel of the car in the picture, because they were looking for ways to keep more of the water that comes onto the site on the site instead of running off into the local sewer system, which is an issue for their town. So that actually helps absorb more water into the ground, which keeps the ground healthier and the sewer system at a stable rate. Looking at the lower left there, rain gardens are designed to capture water if you have flooding problems on your site. There's landscape design that can be implemented to help draw water to a particular area that doesn't look like a sinkhole, but is actually a beautiful attribute to your property. The one thing on this list that's not related to water, but could perhaps relate to your energy consumption, is the idea of windbreaks, the second item there on that list. Interestingly, the property my husband and I bought in Livingston County in the town of Livingston in Columbia County, has a lot of wind on the property because we have a lot of fields around us, a lot of farmland around us, and the wind whips through our neighborhood and really batters our house. And it creates more strain on keeping the house cooled or heated, depending on the season. So if that's a situation where your library is situated, making sure you have plantings that protect your building from wind coming in can actually reduce the load on your building. So just smart, simple little choices that you can make in landscaping could greatly affect water usage, water absorption, or perhaps even the heating and cooling of your building, when you think about how the actual natural world works around our buildings. Super interesting stuff. And there's just so much information out there to help you learn about this. We did a call statewide to find out what libraries are doing for the 2017 summer reading program, Build a Better World. And a huge number of libraries across the state are doing programs about this type of stuff, getting kids outside, understanding how the natural world works, and how we work with the natural world instead of against it, just building in standard ways that don't consider the natural world around us. It creates kind of an antagonistic relationship with the environment rather than working together so that both the environment and the people who live in the environment are getting along well. So the really big area for existing buildings that you can have a big impact on is that of energy conservation. So you'll see a lot of talk about energy efficiency and renewable resources, and it's hard to know where to start sometimes. So this is a good hierarchy to keep in mind if you're working on your facility plan or doing a building walkthrough to figure out, where to invest some time and energy and ultimately money. This is a good way to organize your thinking around that. The first step is to reduce the need for energy in your facility. So taking a look at the installation of what they call your building envelope, and I'll give you a list of what that entails. That's one of the first areas where you can have major impact. Another way to reduce the need for energy is your lighting. You'll see a lot of libraries right now are converting to more energy efficient lighting, whether that be from incandescent bulbs to LED lighting, or if they're going from T12s to T8s, there's sometimes funding through your local utility company to underwrite something like that. Here at Mid-Hudson a few years ago, we received a grant through Central Hudson to upgrade our lighting to be more efficient. And the payback on it actually was really interesting because it reduced our energy consumption by 13%, and that savings helped underwrite the project. So sometimes things like that can pay for themselves, which is always a good thing. So reducing the need for energy is the first thing to focus on, and often is the most cost-effective thing you can do. The other thing to think about is using energy more efficiently, and that a good example of that is the technology in your building. If you think about how many computers libraries have in their buildings, making sure you're using the energy management settings as well as you can, maybe creating a procedure or policy that all computers get shut off every night, making sure that you're not using stuff that you don't need. Here at Mid-Hudson, we have a rule that if you're not in your office, you turn off your light, and some people will actually make fun of me if I forget that these days, which is kind of amusing. But these little choices that we make all add up to help use energy more efficiently. And that's really about just behavior and habit more so than making any huge investment in technology. So again, small choices can have a big impact. Then you get to the bigger ticket items, using renewable energy, which might be solar panels, or if you're building a new building, you might be considering geothermal heating and cooling, which is a renewable energy source that keeps your operating costs down to a large degree. If you're ever interested in learning more about geothermal, you might visit the Town of Esopus Library in Ulster. They were the first library in our region to use geothermal and do it really, really well. You wouldn't even know it's a different heating system, but they pay an awful lot less to heat and cool their building than almost any other library in the system. And then at the top level there is any continuing use of fossil fuels that you need to run your building should be clean and efficient. So talking with your utility company about what options you have in terms of where your energy comes from. My utility lets us pick hydropower to make sure our money is going towards investing in the maintenance and development of hydropower from Niagara Falls rather than relying on coal energy. So that's kind of a hierarchy to keep in mind of maybe in your basic facility plan where you start and then how you move up the ladder in terms of energy efficiency and conservation in your library. So when we talk about energy conservation, the selling points on these are huge, right? Because this is one of the easiest spots to not only do the right thing for the planet, but also reduce your operating costs. And no one can argue with that. I don't care which end of the political spectrum you're on. This is something that matters to everybody, not only in terms of the environmental impact, but the bottom dollar. So reducing your operating costs is a huge selling point on this one. It also really impacts indoor environmental quality. For those of you in the more historic buildings, you're constantly dealing with leveling out the temperature or the drafts in your building that can affect the comfort levels that people have. So really addressing that whole building envelope idea, which are your windows, your doors, your insulation in your attic and your basement, those types of things to tighten up your building can definitely impact the thermal comfort, the heat and cooling aspect of your building. So again, simple things that might not even cost that much, but should be done with that kind of holistic eye to your whole building to make sure you understand how your building works. What I mean by that is if, say, you sealed up your building really tight, but you don't have the proper HVAC equipment to make sure fresh air exchange is increased because you no longer have that, shall we say, almost natural air infiltration from those cracks and crevices, that could create a less comfortable indoor environmental quality. So not just jumping in and say, looking around your building and go, oh, I'm going to insulate that. Oh, I'm going to caulk that. Make sure you've assessed your building from top to bottom first, so you understand how the building works, how the insulation integrates with your HVAC system, and making sure you have professional recommendations on how to attack those things is going to save you time, energy, and honestly agony during these types of projects that you might undertake. So in order to facilitate that, I just wanted to point out, when you're dealing with things like the building envelope and your HVAC equipment, it's easy to think that, one person on your board who maybe had, an experience in another organization who knows something about that could just tackle a project and get it done. But I highly, highly recommend that you take a look at some standards and also draw on experts in these fields who can help you make good decisions. Taking a look at Energy Star rated products when you're buying products to make sure you're finding out what specifications to look for in products that you buy, whether it be insulation or doors or windows. There's oversight in those areas to help you make better decisions. We've actually adopted Energy Star standards here at Mid-Hudson when we're taking a look at a library's construction grant application for energy efficiency. This is one of the things we can judge. Have they made a good decision? Are they using this industry standard of Energy Star to make those decisions about roofing materials or a boiler or a new HVAC system? The other thing you'll want to do if you haven't done this already is to have a professional energy audit done of your building. This is a description of the 3 types of audits you can get, but this is what I mean by doing the work in context. If you're a professional, come in and assess your building and then point out to you where the opportunities are and what order to do that work in. That's how you save, again, money and angst while doing this type of work. So you know it's being done in the right order. You're going to get the most bang for your buck and the choices that you make. And you also see where, someone has a brilliant idea at the board table one night, but honestly, that's like 17th down the line of the things that would make a big difference. So you've got context, a professional's opinion, and you have a more, I think, confident path forward to make good choices on behalf of the library. So just a note, if you haven't had an audit done in a long time, there is a program called FlexTech through the New York State Energy and Research Development Authority, which can contribute up to 50% of that audit cost. So the whole thing isn't on your shoulders to pay for that. So if you want to take a much deeper dive into operations and maintenance, there's actually a certification through the U.S. Green Building Council on operations and maintenance for existing buildings. And this is something that you might kind of go cross-eyed taking a look at, but it is an interesting way to kind of organize your thinking about the different areas of opportunity that you have in your building. Maybe you don't need to pursue certification under the program, but it is a nice checklist to organize your thinking about the different categories where you could make improvements that could benefit not only the people who live and work in your building, but also your bottom line. The other, perhaps more affordable and accessible option that's now available to libraries throughout New York State, thanks to a partnership between the New York Library Association and the Westchester Green Business Council, is the Certifiably Sustainable Program, which is a really clear path forward on these types of topics for existing buildings and operations. They recently did a webinar telling the story of the Hendrick Hudson Library, who used this program to create a more sustainable facility just using their existing facility. So they weren't building new at the time. They were just looking to upgrade their processes, their procedures, choices they were making, purchasing, reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, and becoming more energy efficient. This created a real strategic way forward with checklists. Don't we all love checklists? Again, less intimidating than the LEED checklist. And also with your membership, you get actual technical assistance. So a real life person, the other end of the phone, helping you make decisions and going through this checklist. The Hendrick Hudson Library story is a good one. So if you haven't heard it yet, you might want to listen to that webinar, which is recorded and available on our website. Great story, and also I think gives you a more in-depth and pragmatic approach to how to do this in a more not just a hit or miss way, but a very strategic, pragmatic way to address these topics that are pretty universal if you're working and living in a public building. So let's take a look at renovation and new construction, because I know a couple people on the call have live projects they're about to embark on, and this type of work and outcomes really only are effective if you think about this at the beginning of a project. I learned this from a library who was, I'm going to say, 80% of the way done with their project, which is a multi-million-dollar huge project, when a trustee said, shouldn't we have geothermal heat? And the director and building committee scrambled to re-engineer the entire project to install geothermal, and it did not go well and has not worked well for a very long time, which has created kind of a negativity around that. But if you look at any project where at the beginning of the project, it was a priority to create an energy efficient building that was using renewable resources, and they integrated that from the beginning, those are the projects where it goes well, it works great, it saved a bunch of money. So again, thinking very early on in your project, whether it be a renovation, expansion, or new construction, about these topics, that's the time to be thinking about this kind of stuff. And luckily, there's amazing guidance out there to help you make great choices. We are not the first people doing this kind of work. In fact, we're way behind the curve in terms of libraries building more sustainable buildings. That's something we're trying to change here in New York, and I'd love to see some Mid-Hudson member libraries step up and take on this challenge. There's 3 primary certification paths that can help you really take a holistic look at your building, meaning not just focused on energy efficiency, but looking at all the aspects of building a building and the way systems work together, from HVAC to water to energy usage, all sorts of things. These are the 3 primary industry standards, and I thought I'd introduce them to you based on which ones are most popular, and I bet you can guess right away which one is most popular, which is the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design program through the U.S. Green Building Council, which you see the logo there on the upper left. That is by far the standard for building sustainable buildings in the world. If you take a look at how many buildings there are in the world that have used that certification path, it is head and shoulders beyond any other path, because it's the accepted standard and it's been created by a community of architects, engineers, construction managers, tradespeople. They have really contributed to building that path that your architect is following to create the most efficient, sustainable building possible using the methodology that's been proven over and over again to work. So if you're looking for a cost-effective way to organize your project and make sure it's a sustainable building, these 3 options are definitely a path to check out early on, and to make sure is involved in the planning that you get an architect who's experienced in one of these paths. So the Leadership in Environmental Design path, which is called LEED, you might be very familiar with hearing that. There was just a big announcement that the Longwood Library on Long Island, they just reached the highest level of LEED certification with their project, LEED Platinum, which is very rare and very impressive. If you'd like to read about that, you can check out the New York Library Association Sustainability Initiative, who featured a story about their project just last month, actually, because it just opened about 3 months ago. Super exciting. But what that means means is they took a look at each of these categories. So let's start with location and linkages, how accessible they were to public transport, how sustainable the site was that they picked. They positioned the building correctly to maximize daylight and solar heating for the building, water efficiency of the building in terms of fixtures they were choosing, the landscaping choices that they made, energy and atmosphere choices in terms of where does the energy come from to run the building? Can they generate some on-site so they're not completely reliant on the grid? Materials and resources category. So they made thoughtful decisions about where the wood, where the steel, where the furniture came from in terms of distance, and also how that was harvested, making sure they were choosing materials that are sustainably grown and maintained so they're not kind of deforesting another area of the country so they can build their library. So just thoughtful decisions at every level of the design of this. And they used this framework to make those decisions and make sure they were building a really strong, sustainable, stable building for their community for the future. Because if you think about it, once you build a new library, you're stuck in that sucker for decades, right? So you better make those good decisions up front when you have that almost sometimes once in a lifetime opportunity to build a new building. This can help you build a more resilient and sustainable and lower cost to operate building by using this industry standard to do so. So a lesser known but equally helpful program is called Green Globes. And they got a lot of press a few years ago because the US government, the United States government, adopted it as an equal standard to LEED. So you may or may not know this, but every single federal building built with our federal tax dollars is actually using LEED or Green Globes as the standard to build them. So this is a widely accepted practice to use these certification paths to make sure you're building the best buildings possible for your community. So you can see pretty similar categories there from project management. That's something that you didn't see in the last one. And that one's actually very important because it mentions what you see there under the description, integrated design, which is something I'm going to point out to you at the end of this section, because that really speaks to how you make sure building sustainable is affordable, which is something we're all really conscientious about. But it's a similar situation where you're earning points in different categories. But again, it's basically a checklist that helps you think through all the options you have and are you making the best choice in each of those categories. This product is a product you are going to pay to use it, just like you do LEED and the Westchester product. It's a service that you're receiving that provides you with the tools and resources you need to make good decisions and make them in a cost-effective way. So this one has been touted as being more affordable and accessible than LEED. However, the adoption rate isn't picking up as fast as LEED has. So again, you might find an architect who is comfortable with one or the other. Either one is probably going to be a good path that results in a better building had you not used anything at all. The actual kind of outlier in the categories here is the Living Building Challenge. This is kind of the it's an extreme choice, but we're actually seeing a trend with architects that are speaking at the national conferences for libraries. Big firms are adopting a future goal of building what they call living buildings through the Living Building Challenge, which takes what LEED and Green Globes have done to a much deeper level. So you see here, they're not just looking at the products used to build the building or to help run it, they're also taking a look at things like health and happiness and equity and beauty in the building and making sure that aesthetically the building is pleasing. Because research has shown that a building that is aesthetically or pleasing or beautiful inspires people to care for it and take care of it for a long time, which extends the useful life of your building. So it might sound a little hippy-dippy or crunchy, but it really is resulting in stronger buildings that are more resilient and can actually withstand tougher weather, extended power outages. They're actually not reliant on the grid for electricity. So very long haul thinking for these types of buildings. We actually have the first Living Building Challenge building ever in the world in our region. If you want to take a fun field trip some weekend, go visit the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck and check out their living machine. They have something called the Eco Machine that cleans water naturally on their campus. It's absolutely fascinating and perhaps way beyond anything you'd ever do for your library, but it definitely inspires you to think bigger about what you could do in your building that would help teach people about the natural world and how we can conserve resources if we're smart about the buildings that we create together. So again, might be fun to learn about, not so fun to implement. But the LEED and green globes are a complete industry standard that almost any architect or building professional you deal with should be familiar with and happy to make you help happen. Something else I just wanted to put in front of you is the 2030 challenge, which is becoming closer and closer on the horizon. This has been adopted by a huge swath of our country, from the Conference of Mayors to the American Institute of Architects to ASHRAE, which is the engineers throughout our world that deal with the HVAC systems. Their goal is by 2030 that all new buildings and major renovations will be what they call carbon neutral by 2030. What they mean by carbon neutral is that we're building buildings that actually produce the energy they need on site. So they're not reliant on the grid or perhaps fossil fuels to make that happen. So interesting to note here, again, all federal buildings since 2007 are challenged to meet that energy performance standard in the 2030 standard. So it's, again, not something that's pie in the sky or extremist. This is becoming the standard way people are thinking about building for the future. And again, the time to think about that is at the beginning of your project. Some libraries are retrofitting. If you want to check out, or you're on a road trip in, I don't know, the middle of the country, Zion, Illinois, they have the first net zero library building in the country. And they're not the only one. There's a growing number of libraries that are net zero and those that are approaching net zero. So again, just think about how smart that makes those libraries look. Very cool to learn more about. These are 3 standards that are completely focused on energy. So the first 3 I shared with you are looking at the holistic evaluation of your building, as we mentioned, not just energy, but also water and indoor air quality and site selection and landscaping and transportation. These 3 programs are really focused on energy, which might be a scope that's easier to imagine for a lot of you. But they, again, are standards that are good to be familiar with because they're growing in popularity and growing as something that should be just kind of standard for the way buildings get built, particularly public buildings. Energy Star, we mentioned before, they not only rate products like your HVAC system, they also have a program for buildings, which is a free program through the U.S. Department of Energy. So an easy entry point that you can almost kind of do it yourself. You don't need a professional to help you with that. At the very least, that product I'll point out to you because it helps you benchmark your energy usage, and it compares your energy usage against other buildings that are like yours with a similar square footage to find out if you're using more than your fair share of energy, which could be a nice thing to learn about your building. The net zero energy building certification results, it points back to that energy, the net zero energy point that we made before. That's a certification path that helps you achieve a building that is completely generating all of the energy it needs to run itself on its own property. So meaning a building that has enough solar panels that it creates enough energy to run the building, and maybe even creates more than it needs and pushes stuff back to the grid. So the utility company pays you instead of you paying it every month. A new standard, new to the US, this is very huge in Germany. This is the building standard in Germany, is passive house design. And this is of note here in our region because we're about to have the very first public library in the country certified as passive house. And I'm going to tell you the story of that library in a minute. The first library in our state who went net zero is the Peru Public Library, which is in the Adirondacks. They actually have a smaller building, like actually around the size of a lot of the buildings here in the Hudson Valley. And their board made it a priority to go what they call off the grid. So they were no longer reliant on someone else for the energy to run their building. So they did a solar panel array that actually creates and generates enough energy to run the library without drawing energy from the electrical company. So this is just a snapshot of how much it costs them to do that and where the money came from. They used the state construction aid grant to match half of it, and then the other half came from a grant from the New York State Energy and Research Development Authority, as well as their own capital fund and fundraising to make that happen. Interesting to note, they did this close to a decade ago, and they're still getting press for it. The source there, the local library works off the grid, that newspaper article is less than 2 years old for something they did almost 8 years ago. So they're still being held up as a great model of how to think about the future of buildings. Sorry, guys. So the Phoenicia Library, which you may have heard the story of this library in Ulster County here in our system, the Phoenicia Library actually suffered from a devastating fire. But the board and director really saw it as an opportunity to make great choices to rebuild their library. And they chose to use passive house standards, which I pointed out as one of the 3 energy-specific standards. So what this means is they use construction techniques and technology just from the ground up as they're building the library to create a building that doesn't need as much energy to heat and cool it. And the story is, I think, a great one, not only because it's local and we can talk about it to our heart's content and visit it and check out what good choices they made there, but just to give you a feeling of what this meant to the bottom line at this library. Their previous building was about 1,800 square feet, and it cost $8,000 a year to heat and cool that building. They doubled the space, the square footage, to 3,200 square feet, and now it costs $1,200 to heat and cool on a regular basis. So that's counterintuitive to most people. They doubled the size of their library, but they brought the heating and cooling costs down from $8,000 to $1,200. That's the kind of thing that really makes an impact on the taxpayers when they hear about the choices that you make. And for a tiny library, as many of you on the webinar today know, that kind of money goes a very long way for a small library when you're thinking about investing in other things like services, programs, and technology to deliver services to the community. That freed up a huge amount of money on an annual basis for a pretty small library. So all of these choices really add up to creating an educational opportunity. And I love those libraries that make good choices and make sure people don't forget they made those choices. So making sure if you go through the effort to, like Red Hook did, research local plants and make sure you've got native plantings, having little signage there that points out what good choices that you made. This is an example of the Clifton Park Half Moon Public Library just north of Albany. Again, one of the first libraries in the state to be LEED certified. And they have great PR materials that educate people as to what they're experiencing when they're in their building. You might not know it to look at the carpeting in the children's room, but it's made from recycled tires and plastic. And kids are fascinated by that when they're told. So they've kept up their education about those good choices they made to get the most bang for the buck on the PR end of things, which I think is just brilliant. So paying for all of this is pretty important. So if you'll recall a few slides ago, I pointed out the importance of the phrase integrated building design. And that's a fancy way of saying make the decision early to save the money. Because the further along in your process you wait to make decisions like this, the more costly they get. And that's what this graph is trying to show you, that the level of design effort at the beginning to make good decisions about energy efficiency or sustainable design, those are huge opportunities to implement at the beginning of your project. As you get after pre-design, into schematic design, and into construction documents, when you start to change your mind and make decisions at that point, it gets much more expensive to implement this kind of stuff. So again, just a word to the wise, as you begin design, that's the perfect time to introduce these topics to your design professional, to make sure they're doing the research and legwork to talk to the engineers, the trades, the contractors, to institutionalize that ethic into your design early on. That's how you keep the costs down, or at below what it would cost to build traditionally, which is surprising to a lot of people. So talking about funding is pretty critical, right? Because you can't do this kind of stuff without money. So thinking about this as an investment that you're making in the future of your library and your community is pretty key. But to get off the ground, it's important for everyone to understand it doesn't necessarily cost more to design sustainably. And this is a person who's in charge of this is a very interesting fact I learned. This guy is in charge of all of the federal buildings in the country, so all the buildings owned by the US government, which if you added up all the square footage is equal to the square mileage of Arizona. So an enormous amount of buildings. So they've got a lot of experience and a lot of longitudinal research that has demonstrated the best value for the taxpayer and the public is by building sustainably. So it also looks at life cycle costs, how long those buildings last, how energy efficient they are, and the human health benefits of the choices they're making by using LEED and green globes to build their buildings, they've determined statistically through their research and in a very difficult political environment over the past 12 years that this is the best value for the taxpayer and the public. And isn't that what we would hope to be able to say about library buildings too? It's a great talking point when we're out there selling a building project or trying to pass a building referendum or trying to inspire donations to our capital campaign. I think this kind of forward-looking design is what our taxpayers are hoping for us to achieve at a reasonable price point. And I think we're finally at that point in our history where those prices and the techniques and the methodologies have come down so it is accessible, even for libraries that are small or medium-sized, not just the big behemoth city libraries who have all the money that we can't imagine having as small libraries. It's really becoming more accessible for libraries of all sizes. So it's definitely something to be considering, thinking about, and building into early plans. So funding sustainable facilities, this list is identical to the list that you saw when if you came to the building your basic facility plan webinar we did earlier this year. Looking at any maintenance or replacement costs, money can come from the same spot, your budget, your capital fund, the New York State construction grant program, or fundraising in a capital campaign. The renovation and expansion projects, you're looking at 3 major areas where your big money comes from to get stuff like that done. So your capital fund, fundraising and grant writing, and capital bonds, which are only for public libraries who can go out to a vote and ask taxpayers if they'd like to tax themselves more for a new library building or a major renovation project. However, there are some grants that speak to this work as well, right? We've talked about the state aid for public library construction. You guys who are familiar with that program know not only is energy conservation a funding priority of the Mid-Hudson Board, last year they also introduced an extra point that you could earn if you were pursuing one of those sustainable design paths. So any of those 6 certification paths, if your board chooses to be on that path to achieve those certifications, you can earn an extra point through the construction grant program, which can result in a higher percentage of the grant funds coming to your project. So they're really looking to incentivize libraries to do the right thing and to use a proven path to do that type of work. Your special legislative grants, you're about to get a message from the New York Library Association that says now is the time to ask your senators for bullet aid. These are awesome things to be asking your senators to help invest in because they want to be seen as leaders in the community as well. And there's 2 programs that are pretty standard now through the Dormitory Authority. One called the Community Capital Assistance Program, the other the State and Municipal Facilities Program, which can get you money, but not in a straightforward way. If you'd like more information about that, you can give me a call and we can talk about it. You need to work with your state legislators to get that money. So it's definitely political maneuvering to get to those grant funds sometimes. And now in this particular area of sustainable funding for facilities, the New York State Energy and Research Development Authority does have grant monies that might apply to your project. The interesting thing to keep in mind about money from NYSERDA is that they don't have standard grant cycle periods like other grants do. They have what are called program opportunity notices, which are open as long as the money exists. So the earlier you learn about the program opportunity and you get in there and talk to somebody and get in line for the money, the more likely you are to access that money. So they don't do grant announcements, with deadlines. They have an approximation of how long they think the money will last based on requests they expect to get. So they handle money a little bit differently than other grant programs, particularly that first one, the Clean Energy Community Program. So the money the Peru Library got to do their off-the-grid project, it's no longer just a direct grant to one institution for money like that anymore. They actually expect you to be part of a conversation with your municipality that entails involving a NYSERDA consultant who comes in and helps the community have a conversation about how to be more energy efficient. And then the community decides where to invest grant money from NYSERDA in their community. So to get money through that program, the library has to be a part of that larger community conversation, which might sound onerous, but is a really good thing. It helps you be more integrated in your community, and people understand what a good idea it would be to use the library as a demonstration spot for some of this technology. They do have a current new construction program that's open that it does expire soon, so you'd want to jump on that immediately if that's something that appeals to you. And then you can see two others I pulled out that I thought were interesting: small wind turbine incentive program, and also workforce training for buildings and operations, which speaks back to the green cleaning program that the OGS department has, which is interesting to see both those departments working to help public buildings do a better job in this area. So you can see there's investment and acknowledgement at the federal government level, the state government level, and I think more and more you're going to see county and local municipalities adopting green cleaning, energy efficient standards, and libraries should be at the forefront of these kind of decision making because we know better, right? We know the right way to do things, and this is where we should be investing our time and energy in our facilities. Other grant sources that may or may not work out for you are listed here: the Regional Economic Development Council. If you have a community foundation, there may be some specific designated funds that donors have set up that might speak to this kind of work. Those are regionally based, so I can't speak broadly about that. You'll have to do a little investigative work at the community foundation that serves your area. Banks and credit unions are often investing in facility projects. This could be a great hook to help them want to invest in your project. And there's often family foundations embedded in your local community that want to invest in projects that are going to elevate the visibility of an educational institution like yours. So putting your grant-seeking hat on could pay off for you in projects like this. So just to close up our webinar today, I just want to point out that it's really easy to get lost in the everyday in our libraries. You guys have so much that you're contending with, from building your collections to keeping the toilet unstopped and dealing with an irate patron or a computer that crashed. And it's really easy to get lost in the everyday details that it takes to keep a library healthy and running. So we're just encouraging you to pick your head up and think really big about the future when it comes to your facilities, because there's not much bigger than the earth, and we are all living here together, and we all have to make better decisions in order to survive what climate change is doing to our world. So just my favorite quote here that I love to share with everybody, that you got to think about those big things while you're doing the small things, so all the small things go in the right direction. And with your facility, I can't think of anything much bigger when you're making decisions that have a high price tag and high impact. So keeping in mind the health and wellness of the people who work in your buildings and come visit your buildings for educational purposes, as well as kind of the global citizen role I think we all need to be playing to make sure our world is survivable and sustainable for the future. Libraries can really set the tone and be a leader in this area. So thank you for taking the time this morning to learn more about this and to think about how your library could make decisions, whether they be small or large, that could add to telling the story of how libraries make good decisions on behalf of the community. So if any of the facility stewardship webinars were useful to you, or you missed one, or you want to share them with other people, all of them have been recorded and are available on our website, midhudson.org. Click on the topics menu, go to professional development and continuing education, and you have all the webinar archives. And as usual, you guys know how to get in touch with me. This is a topic I think is really important to the future of libraries, and I think you guys probably know that by now because I talk about it all the time. But if there's anything I can do to help your library make better decisions or figure out a path forward with a building project, please let me know. We're here to help you and to leverage the state construction grant money to help you do this kind of work as well. So again, thanks for coming. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have currently, but you also always know where to find me. I'm always available to you.